to the answer on the question, the radical aesthetic of Steven Universe. Just out of curiosity, how many of you, I asked this earlier, but more people come in since then, how many of you were in an earlier panel of mine today? Yay, welcome back. I've been doing a lot of them. I will be doing a lot more, but not today. This is the last one, thankfully. It's my fourth panel of the day. Anyway, I'm Jenny Blue, also go by Frobor online. I write books. I write about contemporary animation. I have a series about My Little Pony, the last volume of which is coming out this fall. I wrote The Very Soil, which is about Madoka Magica. I have a book, Animated Discussions, which is a collection of essays about anime. And next year sometime, I'm bringing out the first volume in a series on the DC Animated Universe. First volume will be about the first season and change of Batman the Animated Series. So I do a lot of stuff about animation. I do anime, I do Western animation, and I freaking love Steven Universe. I have nominated Steven Universe for Hugos. I don't think it actually made it into the Hugo nominations, but I voted for it. I think, I was saying before the panel, I think either it or The Good Place is the best show on television. I go back and forth on which, mostly based on which one I've seen most recently. It's an amazing show, and one of the things I really love about it is this very particular aesthetic it has that this panel is going to be me attempting to unpack. And specifically, that it has what I'm calling a radical aesthetic. So let's talk about what that means. All right, let's talk about what an aesthetic is. So aesthetics is the branch of philosophy that studies art and beauty, and how do we define beauty? What makes something art? What are different kinds of art expressing? It is also, for lack of a better term, it's a rubric for evaluating art. Your aesthetic is the values that you bring into play when you are looking at a piece of art. And I'm talking about all different kinds of values. What do you find, what appeals to you visually? What appeals to your moral sense, your politics, your beliefs? What kind of grosses you out? All of that is wrapped up in your aesthetic. It is one of the main ways in which people express their values. In fact, I belong to a school of writers. We call ourselves psychochronographers, it's complicated. But one of the things we have in common is that we think of ethics and politics as branches of aesthetics. They are all ways of expressing our values. Different kinds of values, but values. All right, so that's the aesthetic side. That's what I'm talking about there. All the different ways in which the show expresses values, visually, textually, everything. What do I mean by radical? At its core, radicalism, at least as I'm using the term, is about opposing oppressive norms. It's about saying normal sucks. It's about saying, people act like normal equals good, and they're wrong, and we need to change that. It seeks freedom from normal. It is inherently revolutionary rather than reformist. In other words, radicalism is not, okay, if we can just tweak things, we can make it better. No, we need to throw out everything and start over. One of the most important principles is that, so things ain't so great right now, but that's not because the system broke down, it's because the system is working the way it was designed to. We need to break the system. And finally, and this is to me the most important part, if we get rid of normal as a standard, if we stop judging people for being weird, we need something to say that's okay and that's not. And that is hard. that is causing suffering without consent. That's the only thing that is wrong, and that is everything that is wrong. That's the idea, that's the concept, and I'm going to make the case that this is what's driving Steven Universe's values. So, let's get into some other stuff. Let's talk about how Steven Universe frames normal. Let's talk about Homeworld, and let's talk about normal gems and what they do. The diamonds are the ones who get to define what is normal, and they define it as what's useful to them. Being a normal gem means doing what the diamonds want you to. It means serving in the system with the diamonds at the top. It means answering to power and respecting a hierarchy. There are two groups of gems that aren't normal. There are off-colors, who didn't choose to be different, but they are. They don't fit into normal. They have deviant bodies that aren't normal. They have deviant minds, interests, feelings that aren't normal, that don't fit into what serves the diamonds. And you've got the crystal gems. The crystal gems start out fighting for their own freedom and expand that into fighting for the freedom of Earth. And the two major ways in which they depart from normal is first in the choice to be different. Some of them, like Garnet, for example, are already different in their bodies and their minds, but some of them have made a decision. Pearl is a great example here. Peridot is a great example because we get to see the process of the decision happening. They choose to reject what they know is normal and embrace something else, and they do this because they care about the other, and I've capitalized the O there. So when we're talking about normal and deviance, there's this idea that shows up in sociology, in feminist theory, in queer theory, of the other. And the idea is there's us and there's them. We're normal, they're different. We're good, they're bad. That's the other, is all those people who don't fit in the little narrow circle we've defined as normal. And we demonize them, we hate them, we fear them, we oppress them. Anyone who deviates gets squished down. And that's what motivates the crystal gems, is humans to the gems are other. They don't matter. They don't care about us. But the crystal gems do. And that's not normal. Okay. What's driving all this? Because when it comes down to it, the gems are human, in the sense that they are written by human writers and largely think and act like humans in unusual situations with unusual abilities. And a major part of what they're doing is about fear. So back in the 1950s, the US government and some other European governments pumped a lot of money into studying authoritarianism because of what happened in the 1930s and 40s. They felt like it was fairly obvious what would motivate someone to want to have total control over society and run, an authoritarian state like Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia. But the question they had was, why did people listen? Why did they follow? What is going on in people's heads that causes them to want this kind of hierarchy and this kind of obedience? And what they discovered is that authoritarianism is really not a political ideology. It's a personality type. What they discovered is that some people have a lot of anxiety about ambiguity. They have a lot of anxiety about making wrong decisions. So much so that they would rather have someone else tell them what the right answer is than live their own life for themselves. They seek out strong leaders, and this is the authoritarian follower type. They seek out a strong leader who can tell them essentially what is right and what is wrong so they don't have to worry about figuring it out for themselves. There's a lot of theories about where this comes from, like if it's an upbringing thing or something, what, but there's very strong evidence for this as a distinct pattern of behavior. And it's driven by fear. Authoritarian followers are full of fear at all times. They live in constant anxiety. They are afraid of the other. They are afraid of everyone who is outside their little circle of normal, and they often express that fear through anger and hatred. They are afraid of change, because if things change, well, they might no longer know what's right, and therefore they might do something wrong, and that is such a huge catastrophic thing in their minds that they can't deal with it. And of course, at the root of it all is this fear of being wrong, this fear of doing the wrong thing. Now there's another thing that goes on that this research exposed, and there's a great book by Bob Altemeyer, who was one of the lead researchers in the 50s working on this, called The Authoritarians, and he gets into all of what they learned about people like this, called the dominance-seeking orientation. And very simply what that is that is a person who their instinctive way of approaching every interaction is to see it as a struggle for power. And they need to come out on top. Most of us have met someone like this, who just every single encounter, everything in their life is about proving that they are in charge and on top and are winning. And people like that need a hierarchy. They need that kind of structure so that they can be at the top of it. Now, Bob Altemeyer refers to what he calls as double D or double dip people, because what's interesting is the leaders of these kinds of authoritarian movements tend to be both at once, which is kind of paradoxical, but it's there. They are simultaneously terrified of being wrong, desperate for someone to just tell them what is right and they don't have to think about it for themselves, and feel the need to be in charge of everything at all times. And the way they reconcile this contradiction in their minds is by being the person who tells them what is always right. Which sounds weird, but that's what's happening in their heads. There's a lot of this going on in Steven Universe. There's a lot of characters that these things fit to. Pearl, or especially early on, as she develops this shift, but especially early on, she is gripped by the fear of being wrong or of doing the wrong thing. She is desperately correct at all times. Peridot, also, terrified of screwing up until she actually does, and realizes she has no choice now but to be a crystal gem. And we see it in the diamonds themselves. We see the degree to which even the leaders of this society are driven by fear, and by the fear of messing up. They cannot show any failing or flaw, and they're terrified of being anything less than perfect, but also feel the need to always be in charge. That is very much this authoritarian personality. What do I have next? Okay, I'm going to shift things a little bit. So, this idea of us, them, normal, other is very much baked into our culture. It shows up in a lot of places. And one of the places it shows up is in science fiction, fantasy, superheroes, all that kind of stuff, where we get special because different. Which can be a very good and empowering thing, but it's also still basing everything on there's us and there's them. So very often aliens in superhero stuff have power because they're aliens. They're nothing particularly special on their home planet. On Krypton, Superman is just a dude. On Mars, the Martian Manhunter still has all the same powers that he has on Earth, but on Mars that's nothing special because everybody has them. But on Earth, oh, then it's different, because on Earth they're the Other. And on Earth they have all kinds of crazy powers because one of the things that the Other gets depicted as is monsters. And I have a whole panel on that later this weekend. I know of one major exception, and I am blanking on his name, but there's a relatively obscure DC Comics character who is a normal Earth human that gets teleported to an alien planet where everyone is super weak.
Oh God. Oh God.
And he becomes their superhero.
Adam
Strange. No, not Adam Strange.
Yeah, Adam Strange.
It is Adam Strange. Okay, yeah. It's Adam Strange. I love that. They've never done much with it, which is sad. But that's still him being the Other and therefore special. It's just he's their Other. He's our normal. Steven Universe does something really interesting, though. Steven Universe initially is all about this power from difference. The gems have powers on Earth, but they're nothing special on their home planet, except that Peridot has these unique metal powers. And Pearl is an amazing fighter, which Pearls aren't supposed to be able to do. And Garnet is just, I mean, she's Garnet. One of the most interesting things about the show that I like a lot is that Sapphire's future sense gets stronger the more she fuses. When she's Sapphire, she has a vague sense of what's coming. When she's Garnet, she can see all the possibilities. And when Garnet fuses with Steven, they realize they're in a TV show.
That happens with Pearl as well?
Yeah, actually that happens when she fuses with Pearl as well. They realize they're in a TV show. They deal with it in very different ways because Pearl sees, oh, we're on TV, we're performing, let's perform. Whereas Steven sees, oh, we're in a cartoon, I know how cartoons work, let's talk to the kids at home and make sure they know not to do this.
Yeah, just like one topic.
And then the other thing that's interesting is that it pulls the Adam Strange thing. On Earth, Steven's powers are special because he can make shields that humans can't. But in Jailbreak, Steven is special because he's human. And all of these specialized anti-gem force fields and weapons do nothing to him, or very little. And we later see that Lars is completely immune to that stuff, and therefore gets to be, Captain Harlock, or Larlock, as I like to call him. This is a big deal because what this does together is it blurs that boundary. It says, these people aren't special because they're different, they are different and they are special. Those are two separate things. And I like that a lot. What time is it? I'm good, fine.
Wait!
Oh,
No,
and actually
wait.
I have Steven.
Okay.
Like,
No.
that's the prize gems, but because Steven ooh, that's loud. Because Steven is only half gem, it barely hurt him. It didn't even hurt him, it felt weird. And then Lars is not only immune to this stuff,
Oh no! We
but
gotta do
he
something,
can hide
Lars!
others. And I gotta say, up until this arc, I hated Lars, and this made me love him.
It's okay to be afraid.
I still don't think even Steven Universe can do that for Ronaldo.
Oh my gosh! Lars! They were trying to scan your gem! They can't see you at all! Alright, looks like the tables have turned.
Human Lars,
Good.
I've been possessed by the most marvelous vision. You,
Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead, but this is the moment at which Lars becomes a hero, and it's awesome. And, well, he dies and is reborn because he is the Messiah of the Gems.
Stay true to himself by watching himself die.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, I'm spoiling everything up to the most recent episode in the course of this panel.
I've seen
I
it.
probably should have warned about that.
I basically see it all.
Okay, so where does this idea of normal come from? Where do we get it? And mostly it comes from everyone around us, but especially our parents. We learn who we are from other people. That's just how the world works. That we grow up, we encounter all these attitudes from other people, and we internalize them. We take them into ourselves and they become part of who we are. The result is that hierarchical patterns tend to repeat. One of the leading theories on where the authoritarian follower pattern comes from is really strict parents who punish really harshly any kind of imperfection. But we see this in the show a lot. We see characters who have internalized what they were taught by others. Pearl was taught that she is just a Pearl, that she is small and weak and unimportant and less than, and her job is to do what she's told and to follow an authority. And it takes her millennia to start evolving past that. I think it is such a wonderful thing that the show, that her most recent poofing, when she came back, she had the jacket from last one to Beach City, last one out of Beach
Yeah.
City,
That's what
last one out of Beach City, because that was the episode where she started moving past Rose. That was the episode where she started letting go. And letting herself be more. Like, she'd been building up to that. There's a lot about her interactions with Peridot when they're building the drill, the whole mecha combat thing. She's realizing she's just a Pearl, but she's tough and precise and an amazing fighter. She is easily the most skillful fighter of the Crystal Gems. Amethyst, meanwhile, learned that she was bad. This wasn't taught to her on purpose. As Pearl says, they had no idea she felt that way. But they talked constantly. You can see they talked all the time about how bad what came out of the kindergarten was, how bad the kindergarten was, how bad the gems grown there were, and Amethyst was listening. And she learned that that was true about her. She learned that she was that other. So she aggressively embraces it. She enjoys being different from the other gems. She enjoys being a little aggressive and a little bad. But at the same time, there's some dark feelings underlying that. And finally, with Peridot, Peridot's issue is that she was taught that life is built entirely out of rules. And she doesn't completely fit within those rules. Nobody does, as we eventually learn. But Peridot is one of the first non-crystal gems that we see learning that the rules of Homeworld do not work. And she really struggles with that. She really wants there to be rules that she can follow. She really, really wants to have some guide. And she struggles with the fact that life on Earth, for her, is free. And she can do basically whatever she wants and make her own choices. And that is scary for someone who A, has no experience in doing that, and B, expects harsh punishment for failing. Both of which are true of Peridot. I love Peridot. I have cycled through basically every major gem character on the show as to who is my favorite character. It was Peridot for quite a while. Lapis now just barely edges her out for one reason. I felt worse. Okay, that's better. So, how do we deal with being other? What happens when people are other? Well, to talk about that, we need to talk about something really basic to how we live and how we form societies. We need to talk about networks. Because basically what happens is people know people who know people who know people, and that's how a community happens. There's your family, there's your friends, there's people that you connect with over hobbies, there's people you connect with over shared otherness. And that a society is built out of these individual connections, and we see that in Beach City. Every Beach City character has some kind of a connection to at least two others, and you can make a map of those connections and see the network that is Beach City. And you can do the same thing with the Crystal Gems. But until fairly recently in the life of the show, there was only one link between them. There was only one person that linked to people in both groups, and that's Steven. Because Steven is the bridge. Each of these two communities has its own conception of normal. And Ronaldo, who I can't stand but is a very interesting character in this context, is the gatekeeper of Beach City. Ronaldo, because of his obsession with weird, because of his love for weird, takes that boundary between normal and weird and just goes at it with a marker and makes it as dark as he can. And he is actually afraid of all the weird stuff he's going after. You know, his whole spiel about, you know, the secret crystal authority that's behind everything, which, kind of true. Probably Sneeple is not going to be a thing, but hey, there's a movie coming, you never know. Supposedly there's more Steven Universe after this season, so maybe it will turn out that, you know, the Gems have been fighting this massive war against snake people. You never know. I actually like the idea that the gems were made by someone else because they do function more like machines than organisms. But who knows? But yes, Steven is the bridge because Steven's greatest power is connection. Steven connects everyone to everyone else, and that's really important because the opposite of boxing people in and dividing them is people connecting to each other. And here is an example of Steven's connection superpower. This is down in the cluster.
You want to? Want to what? Please, stop!
And I want to point out, what they want is form. They want to be something, and not to get to Neon Genesis Evangelion on us all, but your identity, as I mentioned before, ultimately comes from seeing yourself reflected in other people, and seeing how other people treat you and what other people think of you as. This is the problem the cluster has, is they are incomplete. They are, each shard is isolated and broken and therefore formless.
You might say they're alone together.
I'm talking to the
Indeed.
But how did I get inside your brain? Brains? Wait!
I'm just gonna have it.
Maybe instead of forming, you could do something else? Boy, you
Now,
turned out the one-track
The way the Crystal Gems have mostly dealt with their problems is isolating them, bubbling them, cutting them off. And that is what Steven initially tries.
There's so many of you right here. Look, Shard.
Actually, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. What he initially tries is getting them to connect with each other.
You already have so much to talk about.
And it works. They do it, and it's amazing. It's just too late.
Great.
Because connection is great. Total totally losing yourself in the gestalt can be a problem. This shows up with, oh, I'm blanking on her name, the Garnet Amethyst fusion.
Sugalite.
Sugarlight, yes. Who is, kind of out of control. And more importantly, there's brief mention, but it's there, that staying fused too long can cause them to lose themselves in the fusion. That is the problem that the cluster is facing, is because they are all incomplete, fusing them all together, while it will fill the incompleteness, it isn't really a solution. It just creates this big destructive mass. What they really need is to be separate but connected. And that is ultimately what they do as they start bubbling each other. They remain in contact with each other, they remain able to interact with each other, but they are not one thing, they are a network of many things. And we'll be coming back to that theme. Remember the title of this panel. Skipping ahead, skipping ahead, skipping ahead.
We've all got each other.
Not that that's the theme of the show or anything.
They both all look in one.
God, I love that moment.
There you go.
That moment's good.
So this is the problem. This is the problem. How do we make these connections? How do we cross that divide between me and you, between normal and other, because nobody's really normal. So between other and other, between different kinds of other. How do we connect without conquering or imposing or forcing? How do we do it without building hierarchies? Now, in the 1960s, a man named Jean-Francois Lyotard, and I probably butchered that because I'm not good at French, came up with a solution. He wrote something between an essay and a short book called The Postmodern Condition, which was the first use of the word postmodern. And in it, he discusses that where the world seemed to him to be headed was what he called porology. It was networks of networks. Communities of people who have something in common and share with each other and develop a community together. But every single one of those people has people outside the community that they have other things in common with. So they're in those networks too, and form bridges between these networks. And so you get different communities with their own ways of doing things and their own ways of being, but not conflicting because they're connected to each other by these people who are in both. Steven Universe tells us the answer before it really gets into asking the question. It tells us the answer in an episode called, hey, guess what? The Answer. It tells us that the answer is love. And love is a form of connection. Love is a complicated word, because there's so many different things that we refer to as love. But I would argue that one of Steven's, as I said, his superpower is connection. His defining attribute is love. Steven loves. He loves everyone, even the people he doesn't like. He cares. He wants everyone to be okay and to be happy and to connect. He's kind of a bit of a messiah figure. And it gets complicated because he is and isn't Rose. He has this complicated identity, these complicated issues, but nonetheless, he loves not just others, but himself. Because that's Rose loving him, as she tells him. He is loved and he loves, and that's such a powerful thing. There's a concept that Vika was actually just telling me about right before the panel called radical softness, which is I had never heard of before because I don't follow fashion. But as she was explaining it, it's the idea that being soft and cute and having quote-unquote feminine traits is actually, it can be, if it's not forced on you from outside, can be a radical thing. It can be a form of resistance to a world that values separation and violence and harshness and hardness. This, I would argue, is the root of Steven Universe's radical aesthetic. From its visuals to its characters to the story it's telling, it's saying that the most radical and revolutionary thing you can do is to love yourself and love others and form connections. That doesn't mean rolling over. That doesn't mean not resisting when, bad people come a-calling, when people start trying to harm you and harm your community. But it means trying to make connections and to care, and while also recognizing that sometimes the kindest thing you can do is punch someone in the face.
You should tweet that. That was beautiful.
Yes.
Thank you. So let's talk about when it finally asks the question.
Ruby, I got really scared when you said you didn't want to fuse with Sapphire anymore.
I'm gonna let this scene play out even though it's fairly
I
lengthy.
was losing someone I cared about, but I saw how much fun you were having today. All this buckarooing really suits you. I'm sorry I tried to push you back into being guarded.
It's not true.
Huh?
That stuff I sing about, it's not true.
What?
I mean, I did have a lot of fun today. I loved it. But the whole time, I kept thinking about how much more fun I'd have if I were with her. Sapphire was always there with me. I feel her smile, just like it was mine. It's so lonely now. That was lame, right? I came here to be my own Jill, and I'm still thinking about what she'd like, what she'd want, all the time. Turns out, I'm no good at not needing nobody.
No, it's not lame. You led us on a frontier adventure. You're still the same Ruby who did all that stuff. Even if you're thinking of someone. Look at our friend Lonesome Lasser. They call him that 'cause he's lonesome. Ah, Miss Sally Mae. He's still a rootin' tootin' cowboy blazing his own trails. But he loves someone too.
Well, if I'm making my own decisions, then I'll decide I want to be with Sapphire. I mean, I gotta ask her first. I just don't want it to feel like we're going back to how things used to be, back when someone else told us to be together. I want it to feel different.
Wait a second. Well, what do you think of this?
Solution is marriage.
Steven, did you find Ruby? She's outside. She's got something to say to you.
Of course, dramatic scenes.
Ruby, I'm so sorry. I should have never said those awful things to you. That we didn't matter anymore. I shouldn't have pushed you away like that. I was wrong. Nah, you're right.
I apologize for the slight jankiness. My screen capture software sometimes does that.
Someone else told us we were the answer. But I don't believe that anymore. At least, not till I hear it from you. Sapphire, will you marry me?
Yes.
Marry you? Yeah, this way he's gonna even more apart. This time, being guarded will be our decision. What do you say? Of course. Yeehaw!
Thank you for playing this scene.
And since
We're not stretching this enough. Ha!
now, I'm going to jump now to something else. That was the question. I'm going to jump back to the moment when someone told me the answer.
Ouch. Ah, we didn't mean to fuse. Well, we did this time. We'll fuse. We'll. No, please. I'm glad to see you again.
Before Garnet, Rose was only fighting for Earth. But Garnet changed everything. Rose wanted to fight for her. She wanted to fight for gems. And maybe it was foolish and maybe even selfish, but she was
Following us.
what?
This whole time we thought we were following her, but she was following us. How could she not after you swept her off her feet?
I have so many Pearl feelings. So many Pearl feelings. I have feelings about all these characters. So many of them are so close to my gay little heart. So, what we're seeing here is that question, that answer that is in Garnet's character, is what sparked this revolution. That's what this is all about. That's what it's always been about. It was about Earth, and it was about them, and those became the same thing. So now let's watch another scene.
Oh, I know that scene.
Now, I told you I was spoiling everything through the most recent episode. Here's the most recent episode. I'm gonna let this My gay little heart has feelings about Ruby and Sapphire and Pearl and all of them. My trans little heart has feelings about this.
I need it.
What is this? Where is Pink?
She's gone.
What did you say? Answer me.
She's gone!
Where do you think you're going?
Steven! Hold on!
Don't you dare take one more step. That's it.
She can't take him over. He knows who he is.
Don't you raise your shield at me. I only want you to be yourself. If you can't do that, I'll do it for you.
The cry of every authoritarian parent ever.
Here.
Gentlemen,
And
James
here's
Baxter.
where we learn Adventure Time was right. James Baxter makes everything better.
True.
Did the sound just?
No, it's her best birthday.
Okay, this deserves, yes. Every time you love yourself, that's me loving you and loving you. would like to point out that way back when Stephen was a baby, Garnet, the character who can see the future, was right. He's a fusion. He's a fusion of Stephen and Stephen. Oh, by the way, Stephen and the Stevens.
He watched himself die.
I learned to say
Yeah.
you to myself
by watching myself die. I mean, I don't have time for it in the panel, but you realize that Cookie Cat is the story of Rose Quartz.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Really? Okay,
Yeah.
you're right.
And later on, I never considered that you could be evil. This show, you guys, is so, there's so much attention to detail. The only other show I've ever seen that has that much of seeding stuff early on to pay off later, to that level of detail and that level of, oh my god, I didn't even catch that, is Fullmetal Alchemist. Brother. Okay, so where was I on this?
Trust me.
Where was I on this? Oh, right, okay. So, what's important about the thing with Stephen is that that is the same question and answer playing out. That is, how can I be connected and still be me? The whole episode is a family drama playing out around the child coming out. The whole thing is, how do I stay connected to this family, if possible, while being true to who I am? And Stephen manages to find an answer because he's Stephen and that's his superpower. Most of us cannot actually cure bigotry with a question. Hence, sometimes a punch in the face is the kindest thing you can do. It's not kind to the person you're punching, but it might be kind to the person standing behind you. But nonetheless, that's not a permanent solution. The permanent solution is this kind of connection, this kind of network of networks. And that's really, really hard to do. But the show has our backs, because remember, the show told us the answer.
Don't hurt her. Don't hurt me.
It's you, the fusion.
We didn't mean to fuse. Well, we did this time. We're not fused. We'll.
And it's notable that this time we're seeing Garnet's memory of it, not Pearl's. And she does remember this next part. The two of them remember this differently.
No, please. I'm glad to see you again.
And there they were. Rose Quartz, the leader of the rebellion, and her terrifying renegade Pearl.
Who cares about how I feel? How you feel is bound to be much more interesting.
How I feel? I feel lost and scared and happy. Why am I so sure that I'd rather be this than everything I was supposed to be? And that I'd rather do this than everything I was supposed to do?
Welcome to Earth.
There it is. Obviously, you can't do this all the time. Doing this all the time is called being a pushover. But sometimes this is how you can make a connection. This is how you can fully be yourself while still being connected to other people. Is not necessarily even to accept their feelings as right or accept them as valid. I mean, again, there are bigots in this world. But to see them as interesting. To look at something that's different and not go, ew, but to go, huh. Because a world of difference, this is the point that Lyotard makes about why we're evolving toward parology, is that normal behavior constrains what we can do and what we can think. By this disillusion into networks, communities that are loosely connected to each other but still independent and have their own ways of doing things and their own ways of thinking, is a frickin' idea engine. You will get so much more creativity out of that, so much more art, so much more beauty, so much more strangeness. And what could we possibly want more than a weirder world? How great would that be? A world that just gets weirder and cooler and more complicated and more interesting. And to me, that's where aesthetics connects to morality. The idea that I'm going to value what's different, what's unusual, what's strange, as long as it doesn't harm. I'm going to value these things because it makes the world a more interesting place. And that's what's at the root of Steven Universe to me. That's the panel. This is my last panel for today, but I still have 7 more because I'm nuts.
Earn that money. That's first you for your hubris and
Yeah,
your
no,
will build
I've already earned that money. 4 panels is the maximum you can get paid for at this conference.
You earned that money like 4 or 5 panels ago. You earned that money today.
So tomorrow, 2:30, Queering the Monster. That's the thing I mentioned about monsters as figures of the other and why increasingly we embrace them as being like us because we feel like the other. Steven Universe may come up in that panel a little bit. Other things will too. The Babadook definitely will. Then I am spending 4 hours in River One. First, I'm on the Ikuhara panel. We're going to be talking about lots of his work. Then I'm on My Little Pony panel with Biga. Say hi, Biga.
Woo! Hi, Biga.
No. And then I'm on, this is a major difference between me and Biga, is our feelings on ponies. But we both like My Little Pony.
Ponies, yeah!
And then, still in that same room, I'm doing the dual-named revolution, Making Sense of Revolutionary Girl Lieutenant. Sunday, Nerapocalypse of 09 is my DCAU project, so this is talking about what I'm doing and what I've actually already posted online. I think I'm somewhere in volume 4, but volume 1 is coming out in book form next year. Then again with Vika, doing The Surprisingly Good Place, which is about the other candidate for Best Show on Television.
Jeremy Bearimy!
Woo! And then finally is Lost in Transmission, a history of accidentally transgender narratives, which I cannot believe this con is letting me do. It is entirely about shows and works and games that were not trying to make trans characters and yet totally did. Not talking headcanon, I'm talking they accidentally trans. I'm sorry? Yes, actually, that we're not covering that one, but yes. There's going to be a lot in that. Anyway, this is the various places you can find me online. The Patreon is the DC Animated Universe project. All of my panels, except for one that I failed to record because I was late, are going to be on YouTube eventually. I'm probably going to do one a month for the rest, and that'll take me well into 2020. Huh? One a month for the rest of the time, yes. I will note, this is my last weekend doing panels. I've been doing it for about a decade, and after this I'm done.
Oh, you're so good at it.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, I'm moving on to other things, but I'm still gonna make videos.
We'll miss you!
Yeah.
I'll miss you! Actually, still a tad.
But I'll miss her!
It took 13 hours to drive.
Don't leave us, Jennifer! It's still worth it!
DC, which is a 6-hour drive,
Yeah.
but it was a 13-hour drive yesterday.
It's a 13-hour drive because New York. Oh.
And rain.
Oh yeah, that's
Don't drive through New York City. I've done it before. It's a bad idea.
Yep.
Especially
Great story,
don't
though.
Set out
No.
intending to hit New York City before rush hour, and then because rain, you hit it just as rush hour is starting.
Oh, God.
It took us like 5 hours to cross New York City.
Yeah, it makes a great story if you like talking about the back ends of cars.
Anyway.
If brake lights are your passion, it's an amazing story.
We've got a little under 5 minutes. Does anybody have any questions or comments or anything?
You're great.
Aww.
If I had to say if I were ever the world's nicest diamond, you would be my favorite girl.
Aww. That's really sweet of you.
Hey, I'm
Except for the part where you're volunteering me to carry your stuff.
Thanks for putting this plan out at the end of the day, because now I don't have any makeup to try off.
You can thank panel staff for that. I had no input into
Don't look at me,
my
it wasn't me.
schedule.
Talk to purple shirts, it wasn't me.
really.
All right. One more.
Some people on the internet have argued that Steven Universe is a fascist text. What are your thoughts on this?
That's dumb and they're wrong. Okay, so the argument I've heard is that because they don't murder the diamonds for being imperialists, they are pro-imperialist. This is very poor reading comprehension. They don't need to murder the diamonds because the empire is going to collapse now because it was all built on White Diamond being perfect. And more importantly, that whole episode wasn't about the clash of empires and a revolution. It was about coming out to your family. And the whole Diamond Authority is a metaphor for that. That's what it's all been built around. And so that reading is there. I don't feel like it's a very strong reading. Let's put it that way. I know that there is like a 17-hour video that's arguing that Steven Universe is a bad show, actually.
I've seen one that's 2 hours.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm exaggerating slightly. Here's the thing.
Like, I watched the whole thing.
No one has time to watch a 2-hour video about Steven Universe. By the way, you should check out my vlog about the season 5 finale, which is about 2 hours and 15 minutes.
No time for a 2-hour video. A 2-hour and 15-minute video on the internet.
Better be a sequel to it.
All right. Thank you all for coming. I hope to see you tomorrow. Oh, if anybody wants cards, I have them.